Hello again, folks. It's Tyson, and we are in the basement workshop for day 2, stage 2 of our project, where we are reducing and recycling and reusing to make a shelf to hold some boxes of screws. So, we are going to continue the project today with some more measuring and planning. And, you might wonder, what's with all this planning? It takes so much time. I'd rather just get into it and build what I want to build. And let me tell you, I have learned in my years of building stuff that it is much easier, even though it takes a bit more time before we start working, it's a lot easier to actually do some planning first, make sure that we've got the right measurements. And as far as conserving materials or making sure that we're not being wasteful, planning is a really important part too, because there have been so many times when I've just gotten down to working, cutting my wood and doing all this stuff, and then I realize, oh no, I made a mistake and I've got to start all over again, and now I can't even use this wood that I started cutting. Now, why do you think that might be a problem? Wasting wood. Well, you know where wood comes from, right? All of this plywood that we've been using or talking about and boards that we use to build houses, that kind of stuff, all of that comes from trees. So if we're using wood and we're wasting wood and just throwing it out because we've made a mess of it, that means that we're actually wasting trees. We're cutting down trees and then they're just going into the landfill or being disposed of in some way. So that's a really negative kind of situation that we want to try to avoid. And we can help avoid that by planning ahead. So let's say hello to little Tyson. Let's turn on the lights and let's get down to planning. All right, folks, now I'm set up here. I've got our tools that we're going to be using. My ruler is going to be really useful today. I'm trying a new camera setup, so I'm hoping that it doesn't get too in the way, and I'm hoping that you can see things we're doing pretty clearly here. So if you remember, yesterday we measured our screw boxes that we've got here, and we found out that we need the box to be 29 centimeters by 21 centimeters by 21 centimeters. So I was getting mixed up with the language because when we start talking about 3D shapes, it can be a bit funky. But I'm going to try to stick with talking about 21 centimeters tall, 29 centimeters wide, and 21 centimeters deep. Okay? So we're talking about 21 centimeters tall. That's going from the bottom to the top. 29 centimeters wide. That's going from one side to the other side. And 21 centimeters deep. And that's going from front of the box to the back of the box. Now, here's why planning is really important. I realized that I need my box to be 29 centimeters on the inside of the box. But my plywood is actually a little bit wide. So what that means is that if I took a piece and cut it 29 centimeters, and then I had the plywood resting on top of it, like this, that would mean that my distance inside would actually be smaller than 29 centimeters. So that's what we're going to plan and calculate today. So here's what we're going to do. Let's have a look at our plywood edge here. And we are going to measure it. Now, whoa, boy, I got to flip my tool around, my ruler around. Now let's see. Our piece of plywood we've got to start looking at millimeters here. So it's bigger than 1 centimeter, it's smaller than 2 centimeters, And here's a little trick. You know, we looked at rulers and you see how it says 1/2 millimeter? This is a bit confusing, a little bit hard to look at because there are so many tiny lines there. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to slide my ruler up to 10. And you see here, there aren't as many lines. So it's a bit easier to read. So I'm going to put my ruler on 10. And now this, for our purposes, this is the 0. So this is 1 centimeter here where it says 11. And I'm actually going to look at the millimeters now. Because remember, it's bigger than 1 centimeter, but smaller than 2 centimeters. So we're going to count the millimeters. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 millimeters, which is also 1 centimeter. So that's 10 millimeters, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 millimeters. Okay, so I'm going to write that down so I don't forget it here. And I'm even just going to write it in a sentence. Plywood is 19 millimeters wide. Okay, so we're going to need to remember that. Now the other thing is, I've got 19 millimeters, but here I'm talking about centimeters. So I want to try to be really precise with this here. What I'm going to do is we have 2 choices. I can convert these into millimeters, or because this is 19 millimeters, I can just say, well, you know what? Let's say that this is 2 centimeters, because 19 millimeters would be 1.9 centimeters, or we could also look at it this way. 2 centimeters is 20 millimeters. So we're really just looking at 1 millimeter difference between saying 19 millimeters or 2 centimeters. So for our purposes, I'm going to keep working with centimeters, and we're going to say that the plywood is 2 centimeters wide, or we could call it 2 centimeters thick. So now I'm going to draw not this 3D box, but we're going to draw the box just as though we were looking straight at it, as though we were looking at it with the screws all in it, like this. So I'm going to start with my bottom line, and you know what, I'm going to use a ruler just to make my life easier. Okay, so we can't actually draw the thing to scale here, so we're going to have to make notes on it about how big it actually is. Okay, so we're imagining that this is our bottom piece of plywood for the bottom of the shelf. Okay. Then I'm going to draw the top piece of plywood for the top of my shelf. Now remember, this takes time, and I could fast forward through this and, you know, just zip right through, but we've talked about before how it takes time. It's good to take time to do good planning and not rush through things, especially with math. So now we have our bottom piece of plywood for the shelf, the top piece of plywood for the shelf, and we're going to make the side pieces for the shelf too. So remember, this is our view looking straight on. Okay, that was my left side there, and there's my right side. Okay, so now remember, we want to make this box 29 centimeters on the inside. So that's from this edge to this edge inside. Now, so I'm going to write that number there, 29 centimeters. And, you know, this is not a really fancy blueprint, but it's a good idea to when you're planning something like this, to make sure that you write your numbers and show things very clearly. Okay, so here's where we're going to get some math going. Now we want it 29 centimeters inside, but remember our plywood is 2 centimeters thick. So that means that this part here is 2 centimeters, and this part here is also 2 centimeters. So if I'm going to figure out the length of this piece of plywood here, how can I do that? So I'm drawing these lines and I'm leaving it blank, but when I'm making these lines with these parts on them, that's showing the distance from this end of the plywood all the way to that end of the plywood. So we know the inside width. The inside width is 29 centimeters wide, but we've got these pieces of plywood here. So what's the math behind that? I'm going to write it as an equation, just like we see our measurements here. So we have 2 centimeters plus 29 centimeters plus 2 centimeters. Now, what does that equal? If you want, you can use your calculator. I encourage you to take a minute, do some mental math. Now, here's how my brain thinks about it. Even though I wrote 2 plus 29 plus 2, when I think about it, I start with 29, and then I add 2, so that's 31, and then I add 2 more, 33. Okay, so that means that this piece of plywood is going to be 33 centimeters long. There we go. So from this edge all the way to that edge, 33 centimeters. Now, I talked about planning before, and that's why it's really important that we do this planning, because if I cut this piece of plywood so that it was 29 centimeters, that means that these two side pieces would have taken 4 centimeters off my inside distance, would have only been 25 centimeters, and then that means that this biggest box that I needed to fit in here wouldn't have actually fit. Oh my gosh, I made an avalanche. Oh, there we go. So it would have been only, what did I say? 25 centimeters. So that would have mean that the inside of my box would be here, the inside of my shelf, rather, and this box wouldn't even fit in there. So I would have made an entire shelf that wouldn't have actually fit my needs. So that, my friends, is why planning and doing these measurements carefully is really important. Okay, so let's keep going here. Now, we've got our first piece of plywood, and I'm going to make what I'm going to call a cut list. So I'm going to do that over here. And that way, as I figure out the different sizes of wood that I need, I'm going to write it here, and I'll know exactly what I need to cut and get ready to make my shelf. So this is 33 centimeters long, and I have 2 pieces of plywood. Okay, and I'm going to say plywood. And this is kind of my shorthand. You know, the @ symbol from, from Twitter probably, and from emails, things like that. So for plywood, I'm going to say I need 2 pieces at 33 centimeters. Easy. I don't need to worry about talking about the width or the thickness, because we already know how thick it is. We measured, and it is 2 centimeters thick. Easy. Okay, so what other pieces do I need to figure the measurements for? Well, I need to know these 2 side pieces. How tall should I make those? Now, have a look here. I've got 21 centimeters, and now remember, that's 21 centimeters tall on the inside of my box. So take a minute, and where can I draw that on here? If you're following along and actually trying to draw this yourself, that's great. So I'm going to draw it on the inside of my box, because remember, that's my inside measurement, the inside height. I'm going to make these lines to show what this measurement means. Now, this is going to be the same kind of calculating as figuring out how long this bottom piece was. So take a moment, think about if you can figure out what this... Oh, you know what? Okay, look at this. I've just thought of something myself here. I want you to figure out what this measurement is going to be. So how do we do that? We've got 21 centimeters. We know this piece of plywood is 2 centimeters thick, and this piece is 2 centimeters thick. So it's the same kind of math here. So we've got 2 centimeters plus 21 centimeters plus another 2 centimeters. And again, the way my brain works is 21 plus 2 is 23, plus another 2 is 25. So now I just noticed a mistake that I was going to make. I was going to say that we needed to cut this side piece for the shelf at 25 centimeters. But that's not actually true, is it? This height of our entire shelf is going to be 25 centimeters, but that's including the top piece of plywood and the bottom piece of plywood. So this one, we didn't even actually need to make this calculation here. We could have just said this piece of plywood is going to be 21 centimeters. So I'm putting on my cut list here, 2 at 21 centimeters. Okay, very cool. Now, I'm going to double check to make sure of one other thing, because what I want to do is I actually want to make some shelves that are going to go across my box like that. Now, the thing is that these shelves also have a thickness, just like we had to measure and make sure that there was going to be enough space when we included the 2 centimeters of plywood here. We need to double check and make sure that we have enough space with these shelves, because those have a thickness too. So let's see. Oh, this might be a little bit tough. 1 minute. All right, so I had to change my angle on you there, just so that we can show you our measurement here. But this is the material that I'm going to make the shelves out of, those smaller shelves going across. So just like we measured the thickness of that plywood, I'm going to measure the thickness of this masonite here. Whoops, sorry, you can't even see my ruler. Let's see if we can get a clear view. I don't know, it might be tough. Oh, you know what? It's pretty tough for you to see here. But this piece is... I'm going to use the same trick that I used going up to the 10 centimeter mark. So this piece is 3 millimeters. 3 millimeters, okay? And so that means that each time I want to have a shelf, I need to make sure that I've accounted for space for that. So I'm going to change my angle here, and I am going to draw that in here, but I'm going to make a note of that number. Masonite is 3 millimeters. Okay, 1 moment, we'll change up our angle. All right, we're back at the tighter angle here. So our masonite, those pieces that we're going to make these shelves out of, is 3 millimeters. 3 millimeters thick. So that means that if I have 3 of these shelves, it's going to be 3 times that thickness. And you know what? I'm even thinking, because I have 4 things that I want to put on these shelves already, I'm going to try to plan ahead, like I was saying, and I'm actually going to add 1 extra shelf. So I'll have a little bit of open space, but that will actually allow me to put some more boxes in there if I end up getting some more boxes. So I'm just going to draw these lines on here. Oh, look at this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Perfect. That is going to be a real beauty. So there's 1 shelf, 2 shelves, 3 shelves, and 4 shelves. So that's going to give me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces where I can put these different boxes in. Okay, so our masonite is 3 millimeters, and we're going to be having 1, 2, 3, 4 shelving pieces. So how are we going to figure that out? How can we figure out the total thickness that all 4 of those shelves is going to be? Okay, total thickness. So if we have 4 shelves, and we're going to multiply that by 3 millimeters. Now, how is your mental math? Do you know about 4 times 3? There are a couple ways you can do that. You can think about it as multiplication. You could also do it this way. We have 4 shelves that are 3 millimeters, so we could say 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3. And that makes it a little bit easier to think about, but really, this and this mean the same thing. So we've got 3, 6, 9, 12. 12 millimeters. Now, remember, we had that issue before when we measured our plywood and it was 19 millimeters wide. And so we said that's 1.9 centimeters, and we just made it easy by saying it's 2 centimeters. So 12 millimeters, a little bit more finicky. We can't really just say it's 1 centimeter, but we're going to look at this and we are going to say that it is 1.2 centimeters. Okay, so that's important for us to know as well. Now, remember that this box, this biggest box, was how tall? Let's check it out. So I'm going to measure this way. So from top to bottom, it's hard to tell because it's clear, but from top to bottom, it's about 4 centimeters on this one. I think this might have been a little bit bigger. So let's see, this one is, it's about 4.5 centimeters. So what we need to do next time is we need to just double check our measurement to make sure that with these 3 millimeter shelves in here, we need to make sure that this 21 centimeter height minus this 1.2 centimeters is going to be enough space for all these shelves. You know what? Let's do it right now. I think we can go for it. So how are we going to do that? We have 1.2 centimeters. That's the total thickness of all shelves. You know, I find it's helpful for me to write what these numbers are because sometimes it can get confusing. You know, plywood is 19 millimeters wide, masonite is 3 millimeters, 1.2 centimeters total thickness of all the shelves. So the way I'm going to figure this out is I'm going to take this measurement from top to bottom on the inside of my box for the shelves. So I'm going to say 21 centimeters. I'm going to subtract 1.2 centimeters. Okay. Now, because we're using decimals, I'm going to use my calculator. I hope that's okay with you. 21 minus 1.2. 19.8. Okay? So that gives us 19.8 centimeters of space from top to bottom. And now my biggest box, my tallest box is 4.5 centimeters. So I'm going to write that down. And we're going to have, again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces that are 4.5 centimeters. So let's do that. 4.5 centimeters and 5 spaces. And let's check out our calculation here. 4.5. Oop, I missed my 4. 4.5 centimeters multiplied by 5. 22.5 centimeters. So we have 22.5 centimeters is how much space we need for each of these shelf areas, but we've only accounted for 21 centimeters in there. Okay, so that's an issue too. So that means that I need to change this. I'm going to make this, just so we've got enough space, I'm going to make it 23 centimeters. Half a centimeter bigger than 22 and a half. I need to change that on my drawing here. So this is now 23 centimeters. And then the outside measurement is going to be different too. So we have 23 plus 2 is 25, plus another 2 is 27. Okay, folks, we've done a lot of math this morning. We are almost finished our planning. There's one more thing that we've got to do before we can start cutting our wood to make sure that we're not wasting it. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for listening and taking the time. And remember, that's what it's all about. Taking your time. Taking your time to understand the math and do the math properly. Taking your time to plan so that you don't make so many mistakes. And you know, I say don't make so many mistakes because I'm pretty sure even with this planning I'm doing, I'll probably still make a couple mistakes. But you know, that's all part of the learning process. So we have finished part 2 with our planning. Next time we'll do a little bit more planning to make sure that we've got all our measurements figured out. And then we can get down to business, start cutting some wood, start putting some things together. So thank you for being here with me. Have a wonderful day. Let's say bye-bye to Tyson. Let's turn off the lights. And I'll see you next time.